Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. I am extremely thrilled to have this conversation. I've been involved in the startup culture in Vegas for about 5 years now. I get to talk with somebody who has been pioneering some of the movement out here in our big, glorious state. I'm here with Jeff Sailing. Jeff is the executive director and co-founder of StartUpNV, and he is a managing partner in FundNV and AngelNV. Vegas and Reno. Jeff is located out in Reno. He's also an adjunct professor that teaches entrepreneurship to engineers. So this man knows his stuff. So Jeff, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jake. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a real big honor, man. I've had this conversation now with a handful of guests on the show about startup culture in Vegas and Nevada specifically, that it seems like it just hasn't been able to keep up with other prevailing cities like Miami and California and New York. Why do you think that is?
I think for a long time, we didn't develop the muscle or the DNA, however you want to, whatever comparison you want to make about that, in our culture in Nevada generally, in Vegas specifically, because we had all these other awesome verticals that we were very good at and continue to be very good at, entertainment and gaming and hospitality and mining and all the other stuff that we've been so good at for so long. We just never had to develop the muscle of a startup community. And you're looking around at, to our west and to our east and to our south and to our north, and you're thinking, all these communities have this thing going for them. And we've talked about diversifying the economy now ever since 2008. And it, grow in fits and starts. And then we would kind of get back to our regular business. And then this idea of having a startup ecosystem alongside all of the other awesome stuff that we do, it just sort of faded into the background. There's a few of us that were working on it. And occasionally, we would get some folks through that kind of got it, whether they were either grown from our own seeds here in Nevada, or whether we imported somebody who came in, from some other community, whether it was, Silicon Valley or Austin or Boise or Salt Lake or one of the other places near us that does have a more mature startup community. So I think it's starting now. We've been at this about almost 4 years now, since 2017 with the Incubator and the Accelerator programs. And I've seen just such tremendous growth and interest and maturity, the maturity level growing. We still have a ways to go where it becomes essentially second nature to us. Where you walk into a bar. It's not the start of a joke. But you walk into a bar and you see people essentially pitching their ideas to each other, and getting excited about startup stuff, whether it's some interesting technical thing, or it's just a new product, or it's a cool new service, or something that's by the founder's imagination is going to change the world in some amazing way. And just getting that excitement in the community is, step one. And then, getting investment in the community that's willing to support these dreamers, with the believer side of the equation being the funding. It's just getting going. And, we'll get there. And it'll be our own version of it. It's not going to be Silicon Vegas or Silicon Nevada. No, it'll be our own thing. It will probably have some of the same components and principles of those other communities, but it'll be our own thing.
Yeah, those conversations have increased in just casual conversations. Maybe that's just because I talk with a lot of different entrepreneurs, so that's just more prevalent to me. But I have friends that reach out now and are constantly pitching different startup ideas. I think the internet economy has kind of brought that into fruition because it's shown that it's much more accessible nowadays. And in Vegas specifically, I've kind of touched on this story that a lot of these jobs you can make literally high 5 figures or 6 figures really fast. So as long as you're not kind of giving it back and going out and partying all over, a lot of these people are eventually going to take that money and try to build something that diversifies the Vegas economy outside of just entertainment and kind of the bar industry. So I'm kind of hoping that continues, and as well as in Vegas, a lot of the new residents and home buyers are all remote workers from other cities who are probably still making the same amount of income for their tech company. And so they're eventually going to get bored, and they're probably going to want to build something as well.
Yeah. And I think, all of the city of Las Vegas's work on trying to import those folks and convince them to move here so that they become part of our economy. For a while, they are going to stay at home and they're going to sit in their jobs until they're a little bit more confident. And then guess what? They're going to venture out. They're going to start their own companies and their own businesses, their own startups. And I think that, that's one way of growing the startup ecosystem, along with, doing it, growing it from seeds here, the people that are here as well, because, the more it's in the culture, the more that we're, used to talking about this and having these kinds of discussions, the less people will think it's foreign or that's an odd thing to do. It's the regular thing to do, to start your own company and, create something that's going to be of great value, not just in your local community, but to the world at large, whatever that idea might involve.
Agreed. Yeah. You guys run, had I written down, Nevada's only statewide business incubator. But just because it's statewide doesn't mean that the technology or the startup is siloed to Nevada itself. They always say to dream as big as possible. But why did you guys decide to focus on specifically Nevada outside of just being located within it? Well,
so it kind of goes back to my own personal story that got me here. So I moved to Nevada in 2009, but before I moved here, I had done two other startups, two that went through to an IPO. Both of them up to that point had been Silicon Valley, sort of geeky back office software startups where we sold to mostly to the Fortune 100, enterprise B2B startup. Is the SaaS products are the one things I did. So we had gone through an IPO in the second company that I was with, and I wanted to move to Nevada. My daughter was off to medical school. My son was off to the military. I was doing worldwide sales. So I was getting on planes and going someplace in the world every week anyway. It's like, well, why do I want to keep living in California where they're taxing me to death? And I really don't want to start my next company there. So I'll move to Nevada. So I did. In 2009, stayed with the company for a year and a half or so, and then left and went to start my next company. And I could not find the capital or the coders to do the work that I wanted to do. So I kept my home, but I got on planes again. I went to Seattle. We did a startup up there. Got that one all the way through to an IPO. Then it got bought back by the private equity guys, and that went really well. Came back after that thinking, okay, well, maybe now it's time. Maybe it was just too close to the recession. It's like, no, still no real what I came to understand as being a startup ecosystem, because up to that point, we were just doing our thing, right? We had an idea. We got together some people. We got together some coders. We created this business, and we didn't think of it as a startup ecosystem. It was just how we worked. But after the second time, I came back home, and there was still the capital formation was not there. I couldn't find the right kinds of coders to do the work that I wanted to do. So twice more I left, but this time instead of Seattle, I went to Austin, Texas. And we built a company there and sold it. And then we started, a buddy of mine had invested in a company there called Smart Picture. You could take your phone, take a picture or video of something and then upload it to the software. And then you could measure things on it. So if you were like one of those closet guys that comes out and makes your closet super efficient, nobody has to go on site to measure it anymore. You don't have to do the whole calendar dance. Hey, I can make it Tuesday. And no, but I can't make it Tuesday. Come on Thursday. Fine. Just take pictures, send it up. We'll measure it all. You get a quote. Everything's fine. So pretty disruptive stuff. So we're doing this in an incubator accelerator program in Austin called the Capital Factory. I had never worked in a place like that before. The guy who invented the technology was really smart. I was the interim CEO. I'm in charge of trying to find some capital for the business and turn this invention into something that was commercializable. And it was, working in the Capital Factory was truly an awesome professional experience. One of the best ones I'd had. You're in this 16th floor of a downtown office building in Austin, like a couple blocks away from 6th Street and all the music and everything else. And so the energy level was off the charts. So I did my thing there, right? I was there for like a year and a half. I raised some capital, found the permanent CEO, came back home and said, I'm going to do my next thing in one of these incubators at home. There are 1,800 of them around the country. Guess how many of them there were in Nevada in 2016 when I arrived home? Zero. Yeah, you're holding up the zero sign. It's exactly right. Briefly, we had the mill when the downtown project was going and Tony Hsieh was really involved. But the mill lasted, I think, about 18 months. I talked to the woman who ran it, and it just wasn't financially viable to keep going. So she went back to California, and that was the end of that. But I was pretty convinced that this is what our community needed, and I found 3 other co-founders who had similar feelings, and it was, I had done pretty well in my career at that point. It was time to give back, right? It was like, I feel like I've been down this journey that so many of the founders are going to go down, where you have this idea, you develop a product or a company, you start to get some customers, you raise a little bit of money, and that journey should not involve having to leave to get your company started. So the idea was to create an incubator, much like the experience I had at the Capital Factory in Austin, for Nevada. We did not want to play the North versus South game. It's like, nope, we're gonna do all of this simultaneously, and we're gonna do it as a nonprofit because this is our give back to the community. Now, there's ways to make money around the nonprofit for investors, but the main services that we provide to the founders and the educational things that we do for the community, we wanted that to be, our gift back to the community. So that was the founding story, was to get those missing things to help start to create this thing I came to learn was called a startup ecosystem or a startup community that I had taken totally for granted in all the places that I had worked, until I realized that we just didn't have it. There were tiny little pieces here and there, but it just didn't exist in the same way that it did in so many other communities around the US. And, it would be a mistake to try to replicate, whatever my experience in Silicon Valley or up in Bellevue and near Seattle or down in Austin, Texas. But the principles that are there, I think still apply. And, so part of it is creating that startup culture with the founders and the inventors and the creatives, and to take a chance to create your idea and make it real, and then at the same time kind of work on the funding side of things. That was, when we started in 2017, we kind of got off to a really good start, but we soon found out that we were missing a pretty key component in our ecosystem, and that was the funding side. So, in our 3 years that we've been going, we've had almost 700 companies pitch to get into our programs, either on the incubator side or on the accelerator side, where we actually invest some money. And but of those 700 companies that have pitched, we've admitted 48 of them into the program. 20 of them have raised almost $70 million, which is, if you look just at the stats, that's pretty good. And we're really proud of that result. The problem is that less than 1% of the money that's been raised has come from investors in Nevada. So that really speaks, not only, we came into this thinking, okay, we're going to help the entrepreneurs, but that really just shouted at us that there's just not enough early stage capital, local early stage capital. So now we've got these sort of twin missions, right? So the mission that we've always had since the beginning is, let's help the founders, let's help the inventors, let's help the entrepreneurs, get them to the place where they can credibly raise money, and some of them will actually invest. But on the other side, it's like, all right, now we're also missing this muscle on the investment side that we need to help the community develop. So that's why we're working on things on FundNV and AngelNV to help develop the capital in the market as well.
Yeah, the money will slowly trickle in here. It's kind of just siloed into different areas. But in terms of definitions, can you just go over what the difference is between an incubator and an accelerator program?
Sure. There's not really a formal definition for it, but the informal definition is accelerators are generally programs that come with money, right? And oftentimes they're time bound, meaning there's a cohort that you start on a certain date and you stay for a certain number of weeks and you end on a certain date, at which time you have a demo day and investors come to demo day, and they hopefully after these weeks you've spent with the accelerator, they're going to invest more money in your company than whatever the accelerator itself put in. So that's an accelerator program. An incubator program is a little less well defined, right? We have programs and things that will help you. It's usually not time bound. It's not limited to a certain number of companies, and it doesn't automatically come with an investment. It's sort of it's an incubator. It helps you grow your company with mentorship and education and other things, but doesn't automatically come with somebody there that's going to write a check from the organization. Right. And from our perspective, we run both. We started as a combination, and now we've got two distinct programs. One that's an accelerator where we will invest $50,000, assuming you pass due diligence, if you get into the program. And then the incubator for the companies who aren't quite, up to the point where they're investment worthy. But the whole point of the incubator is to get companies to the point where they are investment worthy, whether we invest in them as from an accelerator perspective, or they are just now ready to go out on their own and know how to go out on their own and raise capital. That's the distinction between the accelerator for companies that are a little further along, and the incubator for the companies that aspire to get there but aren't quite there yet.
Right. Yeah, I had a gentleman on here. His name is Andrew Gardner. He went through the Y Combinator Accelerator program with Humanly. It's like an AI recruiting tool. And he said that the best component to the program was actually the networking and not even the funding itself, because the different people that you meet can give you advice, and they can also come in later down the road when you're a little bit farther along to give you connections or potential business partnerships or anything of that nature.
No, that's true. And we certainly aspire to be, YC is the granddaddy of all the accelerators. So there's a bunch of us out here emulating that program generally with a little bit of a spin on it one way or another. But the networking that you get out of it, not only with the people who can fund you, but with the other founders that are going through it, that's part of creating that sort of center of gravity. Where founders are helping founders, and then the investors become interested not only because they can make money by investing, but because they're interested in their own community, right? It's all happening here. We're all together. We've not been able to actually physically get together for a while, but that community still exists. And the accelerator model, it's proven to be a good helping starting point for many new companies.
It perfectly emphasizes this new age of collaboration. I feel like some decades ago, a lot of businesses were a little bit more tribal or territorial towards their opponents. But now in this, especially on the e-commerce platform, if you collab with another influencer or another entrepreneur who both command attention and you combine them together, then you just bring those communities and those communities that have their money with them, and they'll identify with you more likely.
Yeah, I think there's a place for sort of sassy, friendly, competition, but sort of the cutthroat, I'm gonna succeed by killing you kind of competition it's still out there. It's not as welcome or appreciated anymore, and I'm sure that there are certain places where that's appropriate, but it certainly takes some of the pleasure away. it's not a fixed pie out there, right? There's a way that, if we're all in a particular industry together competing, that we grow the pie, right? That, my product might be, a better fit for company A, your product might be a better fit for company B. But by educating the community about what it is that we do, we're growing the pie for everybody. I know that's certainly been the case in the software startups that I worked at. Where the first part of what we did was trying to educate these companies about the products and services that we were providing and why they were important to them. And when you're the only one out there talking about it, it's hard. And you think, okay, well, I kind of got the market to myself, but I'm not sure that that's such a good thing. So having some competition is a good thing. And it's better if you're not cutthroat about it. You want to take it seriously. I mean, you want to provide a great product and a great service so companies will keep coming back to you. But at the same time, just being nasty is usually not a good way to win.
Yep. I think the marketing strategies have kind of changed over the years too, with now mostly being digitally and social media based marketing. But in terms of the 700 and odd some companies that have come through the Startup Incubator, what percentage of them would you say are software and technology based?
It's probably about half. People think, hey, you're in an accelerator incubator, it's all about tech. And it's largely about tech. And most of the things, even the products, are tech enabled. Or if you're selling, a subscription product on e-commerce for, clothing or some other thing that's a consumable. Well, is that tech? I mean, it's tech enabled, and tech has certainly plays a big role in it. But, and for example, we have a company that's come through. It's a women's underwear subscription company. And, Julie, the founder, it's called Panty Drop. Now, you or your colleagues or the folks that are listening to us right now want to go look at them, go to pantydrop.me, not pantydrop.com. That's a whole different thing. But Julie is an awesome founder. She runs a great company. Is that a tech company? I don't know. So, you're selling clothes, but you aren't doing it through brick and mortar. And even if you were doing it through brick and mortar, there's a lot of technology involved in that as well. So, the lines, it's not a pure software play, no. But so the ones that are probably more pure tech, it's about half. But the other half is, either tech related or just not tech at all. There are products that you just buy, in the store. There are some things that are like that.
Yeah, I think that the idea kind of gets skewed because of these billion-dollar unicorn companies that come out of Silicon Valley that kind of garner all the attention, like the Coinbase IPO that just happened yesterday. That's like everyone thinks now that all of these next companies that are going to come out are going to be like crypto companies or some sort of social media company and like Plaid that's going to have like a $10-20 billion valuation. But the majority of these companies are never going to reach that, but they can still be successful without having to kind of dabble their toes into these emerging technologies on the outer edges of the space.
Right. Well, if you're offering something that's of value to a large audience, whether that audience is a business audience, which is kind of where I'm most comfortable in the B2B world, but that's certainly not. And we have a big program that encompasses a lot of different things from B2B, B2C, B2B2C, more medically related things, biotech and pharma and things like that, that are, they're all great businesses that are going to contribute. Some of them may go on to be unicorns and awesome, and others are going to, do the kind of work that I did. We had nothing that would be considered like a Facebook or a Google or a Coinbase, but hey, there was a whole bunch of people that did quite well selling software that I guarantee you 95% of your audience never even heard of. But you do well by serving your customers, well, and providing a great service.
What would you say the differences and the similarities are between the startup cultures in Reno, where you're located right now for this interview, and down in Las Vegas?
I think that both are trending in the same direction. Vegas is so much bigger, and I think is going to become the dominant force for Nevada. But Reno right now is a little further ahead in terms of the maturity, the amount of financing or investment available, and just sort of the mindset of the community. And at this point, I sort of relate that as sort of proximity to Silicon Valley. The people from the Bay Area, they vacation in Tahoe and they come up to Reno. So it's a little bit more, and if they're moving out of state, they're more likely to land in Reno at this point than they are in Vegas. Although I got to tell you, I'm meeting a whole bunch of people in Vegas that are from the Bay Area too. I think that's really, that's why they got a bit of a head start. And the community up there in Reno was, they've been working on it for a while. Their economic development groups have been working on it for probably 8 or 10 years. And it's just in the last 2 or 3 years that the Vegas community has really come together to start working on that. Lots of compliments from me to the city of Las Vegas. You wouldn't normally think of a governmental entity as being sort of forward-looking and nimble and thoughtful about creating, consciously creating a startup ecosystem or doing whatever the government can. It's always led by entrepreneurs, but whatever the government can do to encourage that. The city of Las Vegas has been really good about it. There's an organization up in Reno area called EDON. It's kind of like what LVGEA does in Vegas, but they consciously went into the startup ecosystem building mode. Right after 2008. And there wasn't anybody really in Vegas that was concentrating on that. So that's why I think Vegas is a little behind. But now, boy, everybody's kind of caught on to it. And the Vegas brand is so strong. And now that the community is kind of getting behind it, it's only a matter of time before. It's the only reason that I would say Reno is ahead, not because they're ahead in numbers. They're not. Vegas is still ahead by numbers. But in terms of, there's 75% of the population of Nevada lives in Vegas, but they're probably only responsible for maybe 65% of the startup activity at this point. But that's going to change. So Reno's out punching its weight a little bit right now, but it's only a matter of time. So it's all trending in the right direction though, all of it.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to see. Like I said, I think the COVID pandemic really opened a lot of people's eyes to where society is trending forward in remote and tele kind of communications and these different outlets.
Mm-hmm. I think so as well, and also just getting people used to concentrating on things that are going to support the startup ecosystem. Like I mentioned, the things that the city of Las Vegas is doing. I'm working with a bill that's going through our legislative process right now, called SB9. That like any person who's been in Nevada for a while knows, we all know each other, right? I think we're 2 degrees of separation from the governor all the way through to the person who just landed here 10 minutes ago. But I got a chance to have a conversation about sort of the investing ecosystem in Nevada with Lieutenant Governor Kate Marshall over the summer. And but based on our conversation, she put a bill forward, and it's called SB 9 or Senate Bill 9. That passed through the Senate unanimously. It's now on the Assembly side, and it seeks to fix some broken laws within the state of Nevada that really make it confusing for investors, about what's legal and what's not, about what's legal for founders when they go out and raise money and what's not, and what they have to do to comply with the regulations in Nevada. So SB 9 kind of fixes all of that. And the idea that legislators would want to spend time on that and understand that that's a thing you need to do is encouraging. And, is that going to fix everything? Well, no, but it's one step in the road, or one rock in the on the stepping stones to getting an economy and an infrastructure here that supports the startup ecosystem. So, I mean, when I see things like that, it's like, okay, we seem to finally have gotten it. And I wish that, by passing a law, or having a few conversations that would just instantly change things. But, this is like a 20-year journey. Mm-hmm. So we got to do all of those things and celebrate the little victories along the way. And then just keep on going, just like any startup has to do. What the work that we're doing is no different.
Yeah, long-term vision on everything. You have to have at least a 5-10 year horizon on the startup level, and the government's literally decades ahead of that. So yeah. I know that they have to fine-tune some of these regulations and some of the surrounding legislation for startups. If you want to be an angel investor, I know there was a lot of turmoil over the last year for people who aren't classified as accredited investors to get in on these like pre-IPOs and stuff like that. Are there accreditation laws to become an angel investor in Nevada?
There are. So if you're doing it across the state lines, you have to follow the national laws, right? And that's all the SEC rules and regulations of being an accredited investor, which means the simplest way to put it is you have to have $1 million of net worth outside of your principal residence, or you have to earn $200,000 a year in W-2 income or more. There's some other rules around that, but those are the two biggies. And there's not a huge percentage of the national population that fits that definition. Certainly, it's a much more easy thing to achieve if you're on the coasts. But that definition does not fit well for Nevada. And we, as a state, have some laws that make it confusing to understand whether or not you actually fit the definition that Nevada has for that, which is a little bit more stringent, actually, currently than the federal regulation. So, one of the ideas here is to not only with SB 9 is not only to eliminate the confusion about, well, which one applies to me? If I'm investing in a business and I'm in Nevada and the business is in Nevada, do I follow the federal guidelines? Or do I follow the state guidelines? And if I follow the federal guidelines and the state regulators decide they want to investigate me, do they have any leverage or not? It's like, well, if they're the same, or if they're very clearly defined for Nevada and they're more friendly to our economic conditions in Nevada, then I think it makes sense. But right now, it's a bit of a confusing mess. So most people just default in Nevada to following the federal guidelines and kind of cross our fingers and hope that somebody in the regulatory environment is not going to get sideways with us and decide, well, you missed this thing. Like in the current law in Nevada says, if you're a startup founder raising capital for your own company, technically you're supposed to have a stockbroker's license because you're selling securities. That's crazy. That's crazy. Nobody does it. I mean, luckily, I haven't seen a place where the regulators have come in and said, okay, Jake, I know you raised money from your grandma, and now you're both going to jail, or you're both getting fined. So, but we need to have clarity, because if we don't, the serious investors that are going to put in the big rounds, the A rounds and B rounds and the big follow-on rounds, they're just not going to do it until the laws are fixed. But the idea that you originally brought up that it's not, I don't know, I hate to use the word fair. I sound like a teenager. But it's not the most optimal use of our capital to continue to sort of have it be a club of people who have achieved this accredited investor status, that they're the only ones that kind of get in on these early stage deals. That, the law that allows crowdfunding was supposed to fix that. And it did to some degree. I mean, you can now go out on WeFunder or StartEngine and you can buy stock in, anybody can go out and buy stock in companies. The regulators have to pay attention to make sure that they don't get too big of a percentage of unaccredited investors on their cap table through one of these things, because there's rules you still have to follow. But now there's a little bit of a battle going on now between sort of the traditional venture investors saying, hey, if you raised money on WeFunder or StartEngine, am I going to also invest on top of those people? Do I really want those sort of unsophisticated people on the cap table with me as a more sophisticated accredited investor. I don't know how that all is going to play out, but the idea of just making it easier for, I'll say, regular people to invest. I mean, they're not going to necessarily write a check for $500,000, but you get 100 people together and they each write a check for $5,000. Suddenly, you've got a meaningful investment that shouldn't necessarily, I don't think, have to go through, WeFunder or Start Engine to do it in an ideal world, so that we can, democratize the process of creating wealth as an investor for yourself and for your family. And at the same time, make more capital available to the founders who have all these great ideas out there.
Agreed. Yeah.
Following that traditional accredited investor standard, or just waiting till inflation is so bad that we all make $200,000 a year. I don't know that that's the best, most efficient path solution.
Oh, that's so funny.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there is a growing trend in crowdfunding. Crypto kind of brought that to light. There was kind of a few years ago when they had the ICO bubble. That was, there was a lot of, I'd say there was a lot of fraud that happened with that. Recently, I'm not sure if you're aware, there's a crypto wallet called Exodus. They just offered the first ever SEC sanctioned equity sale through tokenization. And I was listening to an interview of the founder of Exodus, and he said that 90% of the investors were non-accredited. They fell below like a certain income level, and it was all SEC. It was all U.S. investors. So if that's a trend that you can see, they said they raised 80% of the $75 million that they were looking for. So if that's the case, I mean, obviously regulation likes to trail multiple years behind, but it could be a good sign.
Well, I think it is. And, you keep hearing about these NFTs that people are putting out there, for pieces of art or music or some other.
Yeah, like IP is a big one too.
Digital assets, right? It's like, well, could you do, an NFT with a lot of fractional ownership for a company? Well, I think probably. Jake, you're the much bigger expert on that than I am. But I'm certainly listening hard to things like that. And it's just, at this point, I think it's, unless you're an expert in the field, it's hard to know, okay, so I do want to buy a piece of that crazy piece of art that people or whatever.
People.
Like, I want a piece of that. Well, how do I go buy that? Where do I go? Do I Google it? Do I go, is there a website I go to do that? I just don't think that how you transact it that way is in the consciousness of the vast population at this point.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So it's still a little bit.
There is definitely a lot of speculation. Actually, it's a funny story. Just before we go back to startups, they actually created something called the B20 token, which was 20 one-of-one Beeple tokens, and then they fractionalized that whole ownership and then created, like a securitized ETF kind of version of it. So people are experimenting on it. I mean, the price did crash about 90% since its peak so far. So, it's fair markets. So, that's something that, obviously accreditation and the laws are going to change because of, things like Robinhood and the whole GameStop issue opened up a lot of eyes to not just the investors, but I think the regulatory bodies that surround as well are starting to ponder on how out of date some of these SEC and CFTC regulations really are.
Yeah, I think the blockchain and programmable things like Ethereum, where you can have smart contracts, I think they hold a lot of promise. And it's going to be a while till we get there in a sort of a mass way. And in the meantime, the idea that someone who's earning, I don't know, $100,000 or $80,000 a year, that they can't invest in an early stage startup, unless they want to go through Start Engine or WeFunder. That's just, I don't know. Unless you want to get really creative with crafting your craft table and putting people into SPVs and a whole bunch of other really geeky financial stuff, it's it just it doesn't feel like we're doing the right thing by doing that. I understand, I don't think it was created with the idea that we were going to make it into a club. That I don't think anybody went into the making accredited investor status that thing. That's sort of what it evolved into. I mean, I think the original idea was we just want to protect people. We don't want people who can afford less to have a hit, take a hit. We just don't want to let them have access so they won't hurt themselves. And I think we're all, adults. We have to be able to make our decisions about that stuff. And, when you do find the grifter who gets in there and does take advantage of people, you just find them and punish them. And then let everybody else do the business that they want to do, that they're comfortable doing. But that's one guy's opinion anyway.
Yep. Now we're definitely trending in the right direction. And so to go back to the other side, to the startup founders, do you see any sort of trends among the startup founders' age or demographics, or maybe ideas or kind of thoughts in terms of the founders that you're seeing?
I wouldn't say trends. We've concentrated pretty diligently in our program to make sure that we're not passing by the underserved communities, that we're doing outreach to make sure that they're comfortable, as comfortable as they can be, with, kind of coming through this traditional system that has not been super inclusive in prior years. So we're trying to make it as friendly as possible. In our Angel MV program, I'm pretty proud to say that we have 47 investors in that program. And the way that works is you have to use accredited investors. So if you're an accredited investor, everybody throws $5,000 into a fund. We create a fund that's worth, if we had the 40 that we were asking for, it's $200,000. We're a little above that. But the fund is it's exactly half females and underserved investors, which is, it's phenomenal that we're getting the capital that's now going to have a perspective that's probably a little bit different than the traditional capital. As far as on the founder side, yeah, we're seeing people we've got a couple of 75-year-old people in the group, which you wouldn't expect. Because startup is a bit of a grind. It's like a 10, 12 year, 10, 12, 15-year journey. So usually it's undertaken by people who are younger than that. But we have folks that are in their 60s and 70s that are going through it. We certainly have plenty of folks that are in their 20s and 30s and 40s that are going through it. That would be a little bit more of sort of the expected age. But it's certainly not just a bunch of white guys, right? That certainly there are a number of white guys that are part of it, but it's quite a diverse group that we see as founders coming through, and because we've got sort of investment thinking that's a little bit broader than it has been maybe in a previous evolution of this model, we're seeing great ideas, great founders, and good investment kind of getting dispersed in a slightly different pattern than it probably has been in years past in other ecosystems.
I'm glad you talked about underserved markets, because I've said this on the podcast multiple times that female guests on podcasts are an underserved market. And Vegas is a very good place to have that show, because it felt like there's a ton of women entrepreneurs out here in Vegas. And I've only lived in Vegas, so maybe I'm a little biased, but from what I've heard, it is like Vegas is one of the leaders in women entrepreneurship.
I would agree with that. Austin has done a probably better than average job on that same front. And I can tell you of the 6 finalists that we have in Angel MV, where one of the founders is going to get a $200,000 investment on May 8th. We're running our program at Las Vegas City Hall on May 8th. And the 3 of the 6 founders are female-founded companies and female leaders in the companies. So again, having half of your population, I know half the population are women, but that's not been the traditional case in startup world, where it's been usually 80 or 90% men. And a lot of those either white or Asian men. But it's changing, and it's certainly not. That's not the percentage that we see in Vegas. And we're certainly, we're looking for good founders and good investors, and and we're trying to bring the underserved communities into the fold, and have them be the leaders, as opposed to guys like me through it. And we can sort of hopefully do a little bit of mentoring and then step out of the way and let nature take its course.
Do you have any programs within Angel NV fund or startup where somebody maybe doesn't fit the suit of an accredited investor, but they want to offer their opinion or mentorship towards somebody that's within the program?
Yeah, well, as a nonprofit, StartUpNV runs on volunteers. All of our mentors are volunteers. We have about 130 mentors in the program, some of whom are investors, but most of whom are just subject matter experts on, just about everything, from marketing to legal to accounting and finance to sales to just about anything a founder will need, advice on at some point. So, for anybody who wants to get engaged, even if you don't have money to invest, we want you to be engaged. When we do our pitch days to get into StartUpNV, it's open. Anybody can come and listen to it, kind of like our own little version of Shark Tank, where you hear, some really interesting ideas from founders who are very passionate, and people can ask questions, and if they have advice, give it. So again, we're trying to get the whole community involved in the startup ecosystem right from the very start, where somebody has an idea and is pitching it and maybe needs some mentorship, to all the way to the point where if you are an accredited investor and you want to learn how to be an angel and do it so you're not going to be throwing your money down the tubes to some company maybe you shouldn't invest in. We have a program for that too, because we do want the people who meet the legal standard of doing that to be able to do it and learn how to do it well. And at the same time, working on things like SB9 to try to make it legal for people other than the sort of the old school standards of doing it, that's a little bit more relevant to how we live and work and invest here in Nevada.
Smart. Does StartUpNV partner with outside angel investing groups or anything of that affiliation?
No, it's partnering is probably not the right word. Syndicating is the word I would use. So yeah, when we are ready to make an investment, we will call our friends and say, hey, we are going to invest in the company. We've done the due diligence. Do you, depending on how big the round is, do you want to come in on the round with us on our terms? And usually we're really early when we do our investing. So usually the founders don't want to take a ton of money at what is a relatively low valuation. So they're selling more of their company. So it's a balancing act, right? It's like, all right, is the $50,000 we invest enough, or do we want to try to syndicate that up to 100 or 150 at the terms that we've negotiated? And we do. And then probably more common though is someone will take our investment, the $50,000 investment that we make, and then we work with them really hard to try to get their sales up to the point where they can appeal to a seed fund. And usually that happens when your sales are, middle six figures on an annual basis. And, when you hit that kind of a sales level, you may not have found product market fit, but you've certainly demonstrated that people are willing to pay. And then our partners that are seed funds that are going to invest, a middle six-figure number or maybe a low seven-figure number are more likely to want to hear your pitch and will consider investing. But typically it's at a much better valuation than what we invested in with the first 50. So we've had a number, that's the more traditional way, is let's get your sales up. Let's get you to the point where you're attractive to a seed investor at a higher valuation. Then we make the introductions to them and sort of coach you through the process of getting that seed investment. And hopefully, fingers crossed, later this year, we'll be starting our own seed fund that can make those follow-on investments to our pre-seed investments.
Wow.
But in the meantime, we're educating investors so that they'll actually know what we're talking about. Say invest in our seed fund or our pre-seed fund. and support the Nevada startup ecosystem.
Yeah, there's so many loopholes and rounds to different types of funding and regulations that sometimes it becomes so confusing. You never really know between A seed and pre-seed and B seed and final seed and IPO and all that, all that nature.
And that's all. The thing is, it's like anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's all learnable. Like you are an expert on the crypto stuff, and I think we were chatting before we got started today. It's like I'm done talking about crypto after about 3 minutes. It exhausts my knowledge of it. On the traditional financing stuff, I can go on for quite a while, as you can tell.
Yes. Has COVID affected the startup culture at all, or in the way that you guys go about operating? Has it been a deterrent, or has it actually accelerated the progress of StartUpNV?
It slowed us down for the first month or two. And then once everybody got used to doing the Zoom thing, it actually helped because it was way easier to have more meetings. It's easier to have a quick meeting with somebody, whether it's a founder, asking questions of us, or whether it's me trying to find investors. The idea that you can hop on a Zoom for 20 or 30 minutes rather than having an in-person meeting, it's made that part of it easier. It's also made the pitching bit easier too, because it was a little bit rough at first when everybody's kind of getting used to the technology, but now everybody knows how to use these tools, whether it's Google Meets or Zoom or one of the other tools. So it's made it easier in that regard. So we've seen the momentum pick up as we've gotten further and further away from those first few months, but there's still a huge desire to do things in person. So, we see that, and we held our first in-person pitch day in quite a while last week. And there was a bunch of people just like, I know I don't have to come down to the office in downtown Vegas, but I want to come to the office in downtown Vegas. And I hope we see the same thing with our event where we're awarding the $200,000 at Las Vegas City Hall. There seems to be a lot of interest in, well, how many people can we do? It's like, all right, I think we can do 115 people in a 500-seat auditorium. And we're hoping that on May 1st, they'll actually increase that a little bit so we can have a few more people out. But at the same time, you know what? It's running on Zoom. It's running on YouTube for people who either still aren't comfortable with it or who just don't want to spend the time, driving down their park and, coming in and doing the socialization thing or socializing thing. So we see it's going to be some hybrid for quite a while, and it hurt us at first, but it's sort of a little bit of a tailwind now that everybody's not comfortable having the Zoom meetings and things like that.
Yep. Well, that's just kind of embodying what startup culture is, right? You kind of got to adjust on the go and then optimize it somehow to improve it in the efficiency. I have one final question for you. I'm going to tweak it a little bit, but it's the same question that I ask everybody. And it is, what does Nevada mean to you?
Well, I love the theme, home means Nevada, because Nevada means home to me. I've lived a lot of places around the country. When I was a kid back east in the Midwest, in California for a long time, and then here for the last 12 years, and spent my professional career traveling the world. And I still haven't found a place that feels more like home than Nevada. And that goes to that 2 degrees of separation that I was talking about, right? Where it's not uncommon for, everyday people to be engaged with people that in other parts of the country, they may be considered like, oh, they're above us in the culture. And you don't see that here, or at least not nearly as much of it as you see in other places. And, as we grow, I hope we don't lose that friendliness, that openness to spend time with, people that just want to have a chat, whether it's by Zoom or you're out somewhere. That's what it means to me. And, I love the spirit of our state. That's still that old Western, gotta get it done, grind it out kind of spirit, together with the friendliness. It's just been such a treasure to me. I think about it every day.
Beautifully well put. And I actually on the podcast say all the time that Vegas and Nevada residents are just 1 to 2 degrees of separation from anybody. So I'm so happy you actually said that.
Yeah.
Where do I send all the listeners and viewers to get involved with StartUpNV, FundNV, AngelNV, and Jeff Sailing?
Okay. So for the easiest place to go is to startupnv.org. That'll give you connections to a lot of other parts of our program. I mean, if you really want to go and look at AngelNV specifically, there's a website, angelnv.com, and there's a website for FundNV, fundnv.com. But it's all sort of centralized at startupnv.org. You can reach out to me there as well, or if you want to shoot me an email, you can. Jeff@startupnv.org is the best way to get to me personally. You can find me on LinkedIn and every other place you would expect to find somebody on social media as well. Although LinkedIn's probably the place that I pay attention to most on social media perspective.
Yeah, Jeff's LinkedIn page is popping. 99 endorsements on pretty much everything. Absolutely killing the game.
Yeah, I know there's lots. As soon as you put the name angel investor or investor on your profile, then you get a lot of incoming traffic. It's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I'll make sure everything's tagged below. Jeff, I would actually love to participate in some of those startup pitches, just to offer my advice. Maybe one day become an angel investor as well. That's something that I've always looked forward to being. And I'm glad that you are pursuing the Startup Incubator, because it's also an idea that I had for a little while too.
Great. Well, there can be more than one. Mm-hmm. We're a nonprofit. The fact that there's more of them for us is better. We think it's better. It'll serve more people. So
exactly.
And we'll put you on the list to come to our pitch days too.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you again for coming on, and thank you guys for listening. We will catch you next time.